Hi everyone, this is Cheryl McQueen with Bello's Designs. Today we are going to do a fun card. I actually haven't made an example up ahead of time. We're just going to kind of freestyle it, but we're going to use the Nellie's Choice stamp. It's called Gone Forever, and the Tim Holtz Watercolor Pencils. The reason I wanted to do this today, kind of on the fly, is to show you that you don't necessarily have to plan things out ahead of time, and you can still come up with a really gorgeous card. So the supplies that we're going to do today, as I said, is the Tim Holtz Watercolor Pencils. If you have never used these before, these are wonderful and lots of fun. And I know people sometimes say, oh, that's a little bit intimidating. I don't know how to watercolor. You don't have to know how to watercolor. This is going to be a process that you can pick up easily on, and it's so much fun you'll get addicted to it. We'll use a couple of inks. I've got some distress inks here that we will use for our sky background. We'll use the Wilted Violet in the distress ink, the Carved Pumpkin, and the Kitsched Flamingo. As we go through, I will let you know the names of the colors that we use with the watercolor pencils, and I'll also list them below the video here so that you can see a complete list of what we end up using today. So we are going to start out by using the Lavinia Multifarious cardstock. I usually get the 7x7 and cut it down to the size I want. Today the size that we're going to use is 4 3/4 by 3.5 inches. We will then put a frame around it after we finish doing our art. That cardstock is going to be 5 inches by 5 3/4. And then for our card base, I've just got a piece of color cardstock here. This one is an 8.5 by 11 sheet that I've cut in half, and then we took that half and just folded it in half. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to do. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our cardstock, our art cardstock that we're going to use. That's this one. And I've got this stamping platform that I have put a sticky grid down. That way I don't have to worry about using any magnets or anything, which is a great thing to do. I'm going to zoom this in just a little bit so you can see it a little bit closer. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and stamp. So I'm going to place my stamp where I would like for that to be, and we're just going to kind of have the tree hanging off just a little bit. We're going to use the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink to do our basic stamping. So I've got this right here. Ink up our stamp. The stamp pad may be running out of ink. I'll have to look and see if I've got another one, but if not, we'll just stamp it a second time. That's the nice thing about the stamping platform, is that if you don't feel like your first image really does what you want it to do, then you can always stamp it again. So I'm going to wipe off some of this ink I got on the side so we're sure that we don't get it on our card where we don't want it to be. And let's see what we get. I don't think that's going to be dark enough image. If not, we'll re-ink it. Almost. I think I'm going to put just a little bit more ink on that just to get it crisp and sharp. If I can get the lid off. There we go. Alright, let's try this again. Just a little thicker. All right, there we go. Once we get a nice crisp image, I'm going to go ahead and wipe my stamp off really quickly so that it doesn't stain. All right, and now we can set our stamping platform aside. Okay, so there we've got a really pretty image. Now I think what I want to do is have this scene be at sunset. So what I have, let me set these aside for just a moment. What I have is just you can't see it too well, but it's just a circle mask. This one's about 1 inch. And I want to put that right over here so that it looks like the sun is starting to set over the horizon. I'm going to actually take just a tiny little piece of tape so it doesn't wiggle around when I start doing the background. So we're going to have that with the sun setting. Then for this, it's just going to be a very simple taking of our brushes here and applying some ink. So what I'm going to start out with is the orange. This is the carved pumpkin. And I'm just going to get a little bit on my brush. And then staying right at the horizon line, I'm just going to kind of go right across here to get a little bit of that orange sunset look. All right, so there's just a very basic little layer of that. Then I'm going to go to the pink. Just blend that a little bit here above the orange. Trying to be very careful to avoid my tree. It won't hurt if it gets over just a little bit because we will be watercoloring over that with our watercolor pencils. All right. And then finally, we will do this wilted violet. As it goes up into twilight, starting to get to be nighttime. All right. And again, I'm just going to try to avoid the tree. It doesn't matter too much if it overlaps a teeny tiny little bit. But we don't want it solidly over the top of that. Just a little bit of color down here just under the tree. Now one thing you may notice is that I'm not really worried about getting it super duper solid because obviously the sky is going to have varying shades in it. I'm actually even going to go ahead and take my purple and go just a little bit over the orange just to get it to blend. And we can actually fill some of that in behind the tree later on if we feel like we have some empty spaces that don't have our color on it. Maybe a little bit darker with the purple at the very top, and then leave the lighter purple down at the bottom. All right, and there now we have got our sunset sky there in the background. So So we can go ahead and remove our little mask there. And then I'm going to take my orange brush. I'm not going to add any ink to it. I'm just going to lightly brush over that just to give a little hint of the orange to where our sun is. Okay, so now we can start with our watercoloring. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the tree. And let's see what colors we've got. We've got some really great greens. Now I know one of the things that people worry about the most when they're thinking about the watercoloring is that, oh no, I'm just not going to be able to do all of the shading and depth and everything that you normally see with watercoloring. You really don't have to worry too much about that, because quite honestly, if you just use a couple of shades, you're going to get that effect that you want. And the nice thing about the stamps is it shows you where to put the darker colors. So let's start with a lighter green. Let me look here. I think this is going to be a good one to start out with. This one is called Peeled Paint. So we're going to start out with peeled paint. We're going to take one of our brushes. I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit larger one. And what you're going to do is you're going to take some water. Just spray a little bit on the side of your work surface here so that you can dip your paintbrush in it and pick up a little bit of water. You pick up that water, brush along the watercolor crayon. What this does is it just picks up some light little bit of color. Adds that to your brush. And then we're just going to paint the entire top part of the tree right now, because we're going to go back in and add the shades with the darker green in just a minute. But we just want to get our base color down. Alright, so very quick and simple, just putting a little bit of light green down. Now I might get just a tiny bit smaller brush, dip it in there, and I'm going to move to the Rustic Wilderness. This is just a little bit deeper shade of green. We're going to do the same process where we dip our paintbrush into the water. And then on these darker areas, and like I said, the great thing about the stamps is they show you where the shadowing and the darker colors need to go. So just go in and start adding some color where you see those darker marks. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit more so hopefully you can see that a little bit easier. So you can see that I just put a little bit of that darker green down close to the bottom part of the tree where it's going to be in the shadows, and then up here where you can see a little bit. And do you see how quickly that adds depth? And all I've done is use two colors. Now, you don't have to, but if you decide that you want to add even a little bit more shadows just every once in a while, grab a darker color. So maybe this walnut stain. And you can just kind of hint a little few areas with the walnut stain just to give it some dark shades. If you keep your brush a little bit drier, don't dip it in the water, but just dip it back into this, then you can get a little bit of texture as well. Kind of some few of the brush marks can start showing up. And again, just tiny little hints of it. All right. I am quickly going to grab a paper towel here and kind of dry off, clean off my brush. Wipe this up before we move on to our next color. Okay, so I think we are ready to go ahead. I think I want to go ahead and do the sand. Now, let's see, what is a good color for our sand? We want it to be a light color. Let's start out with a wild honey. So this is the wild honey color. And I'm going to take the big brush again, squirt some water, pick up some of our color, get just a little bit of sand color down here. Now I'm letting the dark part be back here so that you can see that you're kind of picking up some of the shadows. The bench will shadow the beach just a little bit, so I'm just basically just applying just a little bit thicker layer. And we'll do some right here around our little bush that's kind of here on the beach as well. So that you pick up a little bit of the shadowing. Alright, so I will clean this brush off just a little bit. Now sometimes what I like to do too is just pick up another darker color. Maybe we'll go back to our walnut stain. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to get some on the tip end so that I can just dab a few little spots around to just kind of give a little texture to the sand. And we actually don't want our brush to be too terribly wet because we want it to just do more dots than actual solid. And I know that's not something that you're going to be able to pick up on very easily. I'll see if when I pick this card back up and see if we can show it just a little bit. It'll be a lot easier to see when you're actually doing it yourself than it is on the camera, but I don't know if you can see there's just a few little spots in there to try and give it some texture so it's not quite so flat. Now, as you're working on your project, if you feel like it's getting a little too wet, just take your heat tool, just run it over a little bit, and then that will help to dry your card up a little bit, get some of that moisture out, and then if you need to, you can straighten it out some. All right, so now let's go ahead and do our ocean color. We will start out with the Mermaid Lagoon, which is a pretty deep blue. Since we've got a lot of water, I'll use a larger brush again. So I'm going to go ahead and clean out the color that we used before so we don't get too much bleed over. All right, and now we will get ready to start working on the ocean. All right, so what we're going to start out with doing is using the Mermaid Lagoon, and then we will take our prize ribbon to add just a little bit of deeper color, kind of like we did with our tree. So add a little water down here, take our brush, and again, we're going to pick up the color off of the pencil. And we're just going to color this in pretty solidly to get our base blue down. Be sure and catch our color that's underneath the bench and kind of in the in-between section there. We'll try our best not to color over the bench. Again, this is just our base color, so it's just a light coating over the top. Now we will move on to the prize ribbon to give it a little bit of darker color. I'm going to go ahead and use a smaller brush because I want to pick and choose a little bit more. And once again, they kind of show you the darker areas. So that's where you can kind of put in some darker blue for our varying shades of water, showing the depth. And like I said before, I know people get a little nervous when it comes to trying to do watercolor type effects, but it's really not as hard as it looks like it will be. And the nice thing about it is, if it's too dark, add a little bit of water, kind of thin it out. If you need it darker, then you just go back and add a little bit more color. In the areas where you've got trees or something like that, just make the color a little bit darker, and to that you just pick up some more color off of your pencil without adding water. That way you get the darker color. When I do that, I even put it a little more sporadically just to get that deeper effect, but we don't want it all over the place, so I hope that makes sense to you. Especially, say, like right along the shoreline edge here where we're under the shadow of the tree. Just brush it around the very bottom edge. So you can see that we've got several shades now of blue, and all we did was use 2 different colors. Alright, same process, because we don't want to blend our colors too much. I'll go ahead and spritz my brush and dry it off. Now, let's pick a nice dark brown color. I think we'll go back with our walnut. Okay, so we've got Vintage Photo and we've got Walnut Stain. So for our bench, we'll put our light, which is the Vintage Photo, over the entire thing, and then we'll highlight it with our with our Walnut Stain. Spritz some more water, get some clean, and all of this is done exactly in the same fashion, where we're just painting it on, picking up the color, And that bench is pretty small, so I'll probably move on over to a skinnier brush, especially to get my legs on the bench. Alright, and then we want to do our shadows, so we take the darker color, the walnut stain, so see how simple that is? It's just a very easy little process. And since we've got these shadows here of the bench on the beach, let's just go ahead and take our black soot, wet our brush, and we'll just add just a little bit of that in there to get the shadow to be deeper. Alright, so it looks like we are getting pretty close to being finished. We just need to do our little bit of foliage and the trunk. I am going to go ahead and go back to my peeled paint. And just go over the little bush over here. And then I'll go ahead and get a little bit of the darker green just at the base, again because of our shadowing. Give a little bit more dimension. Go over to this side. Get our green color in there and the little part right there, and really you don't need to worry if it bleeds over just a little bit. These are very small, but that just kind of enhances it and brings that coloring out. This is not something, this type of project is not something that has to be perfect. You're wanting to give the effect without hopefully having to put too much effort into making it look like it's a watercolor. I'm going to put a little bit of green shadowing just right around the base of the tree before we do our trunk. And same thing with our trunk as we did with the other. We'll start out with the lighter shade, the Vintage Photo. The nice thing too about these pencils is some of these areas that might be tiny, you can actually go in and just draw right over it, just like you would with a pencil. If you don't have a tiny enough brush, or you just like the effect of using the pencil part, you can do that too. That usually gives you a little deeper shade when you do that, if it's darker than you want. And the great thing about it is just take a wet paintbrush and go over it, and you can draw it out or thin it down, lighten the color a little bit. Draw that out just a little bit to give our shadowing. And then our final color, taking our walnut stain again and just darkening some areas. So there we have the main part all done. Like I said, I think what I would like to do, I'm going to wipe this up so I don't get my card all wet, is I'm going to take some of the carved pumpkin. I'm just going to go ahead and tiny little bit. I don't want a whole lot. Just put a little more orange across my sun so it's not quite so bright as it's setting there. A little bit more of that orange sunset glow to it. All right. Okay, so the final thing that I like to do, I always like to get just a tiny little bit of shadowing around my picture to kind of draw the eye to the center and to give it a little bit of a frame. So I'm going to take some of the chipped sapphire and just a little tiny dauber thingy and just gently go around the edge just to give a little bit of shadowing. Like I said, to me it gives it a little bit of a frame effect. Draws the eye to the center. It just to me feels a little bit more like a finishing touch. So just gently going around the edge with a little bit of that darker color. There we go. I think that, to me, just gives it that finishing touch, that final little finishing look. All right. Then we are ready to go ahead and put our card together. So let me grab the card. This will be our frame. We're going to lay that on top. I like to use the running tape. It's really quick and easy to use, but you can obviously use your any kind of paper glue that you have that you like to use. We will center that in the middle there. Press that down, and now let me look and see if I do like the blue for my background. Oh yeah, look how that makes that pop. That's really pretty. And the nice thing about this particular stamp, too, is if you like to put sentiments on your card, you've got a gorgeous space right up here where you can pop in a little sentiment. If I had thought of that, I would have pulled one out to see what we could put in there. And obviously you can put a sentiment on the inside of your card. So there's our finished product. And again, it's just very simple. You don't need to be afraid of using watercolor pencils because it's a very simple process. It doesn't take a lot of watercolor background skills or anything like that. It's just a fun thing to do, and look at the beautiful results that you can get. I hope that you will try this technique and the stamps, the Nellie's Choice stamps. They have a lot of beautiful scenes, lighthouses, and just all kinds of gorgeous, gorgeous scenes that you could try your hand at with this type thing. So anyway, be sure and check out the delbellosdesigns.com website for the different Nellie's Choice stamps and for more tutorials on the design team page. And I want to thank you very much for watching my video tutorial today. Have a great day.